In the modern-day Japan, Haruto promises his girlfriend, Miharu, that he'll always love her, as he says his goodbyes. The scene shifts to the 20-year-old Haruto who's on a bus. As he looks at a depressed-looking girl, the bus crashes, resulting in Haruto's death. Haruto wakes up to find himself in the body of a little boy called Rio, in the medieval age in the slums of the kingdom of Bertram. The men inhabiting the place walk in and start eating their breakfast, as they tell Rio to bathe because he smells. While picking blueberries, Rio becomes more confused, after Haruto's memories are confused with his own. This makes him start doubting if he's Rio or Haruto, remembering his loving mother who wanted to take him to Yagumi, and how she was killed in front of him. Rio decides that he is Rio who wants to avenge his mother. Rio encounters 3 witches who are looking for the missing princess Flora. The 3 gruffly ask Rio, belittling him for being a peasant. One of the witches is the kind-hearted Celia, who approaches Rio and asks him if he knows about Flora, to which Rio replies he doesn't. After Rio tells her he doesn't know, Celia checks the place to see if there are other magicians, and, to her surprise, there's none but Rio, who is surprised to see that he has magical powers. Before Celia and the other 2 leave, she rewards Rio with a small bag of coins for being helpful. Rio rushes back to his home, only to be surprised by a masked intruder trying to stab him in the heart. Rio is lucky when the knife stabs the bag of coins. To make matters worse, the men Rio stays with are also lying dead. Before the stranger can finish Rio off, a spirit of a beautiful girl appears and quickly teaches Rio to use his hidden magical powers. Rio activates his magic and attacks the masked stranger, who also happens to be a magician, but his magic is no match for Rio. As Rio overpowers him and knocks him out, Rio hears a voice coming from the potato sack, and it turns out to be the missing princess Flora. Seeing the dead bodies, Flora faints. Rio carries the unconscious Flora back to the 3 women and tells them what happened. Christina, Flora's sister, doesn't buy it and accuses Rio of being an accomplice in abducting her sister. When Rio tries to defend himself, they shut him up and decide to take him to the palace, just to make sure. Knights of the royal guard arrive at the slum and arrest the kidnapper. While the kidnapper is dragged out, a man dressed in a cloak, Rias, lurks amongst the crowd. Rias takes out a red pill and crushes it, resulting in the death of the kidnapper, and silently walks away. Later on, Rio is interrogated and tortured in the basement of the palace by Charles Arbor, trying to beat a confession out of him. Celia enters the room and orders Charles to stop after Rio is found innocent, therefore cleared of all charges. Rio later wakes up in a chamber with Celia by his side, who prepares to meet up with the king. Rio shows up dressed in good fashion and with a haircut before the king, who thanks him for saving Princess Flora and grants him a scholarship to study at the Beltram Royal Academy. In his first class, Rio is not well met, as students mock him for being a peasant. However, Celia treats him warmly and recognizes his potential, as she also starts giving him private lessons after class. While training with the sword, Rio is intensely hated by his classmates, as none of them agree to practice with him. So, the instructor practices with Rio, and starts a fight. Rio impresses the instructor with his fighting skills so much that the instructor praises him and tells him he'll become a knight one day. 5 years later, Celia announces a contest where students will duel the royal knights. Even though Rio doesn't want to fight, he's chosen to be one of the representatives of the academy. When the contest starts, Rio is chosen to fight first against Charles, who tortured him earlier. As the fight begins, Rio easily disarms Charles and defeats him. Charles shamefully admits defeat and holds his head low. Later on, in a magic class, Celia teaches magic to her students and shows her magical powers, astounding her students. When practicing, all students succeed in wielding magic, except for Rio, who seems to be having a hard time doing it. During an outdoor test, the students are divided into groups and are tasked with going into the woods and fighting the monsters. Given that Rio isn't good at wielding magic, Alphonse has him carry the entire luggage. First, the team is attacked by goblins, but easily defeat them with their magic. Shortly after, the team stops at a cliff. Suddenly, orcs show up and attack the team with spears. One of the students, Alphonse, is scratched in the thigh and accidentally pushes Flora off the cliff. Rio jumps, propels Flora back to the cliff with his magic, and takes the fall instead. However, Rio lands safely and starts wondering where he got those magical powers from. After fighting off the orcs, Alphonse starts accusing Rio of attempting to kill Flora, to which the commander of the group, Stuart, agrees. Overhearing them from down the cliff, Rio decides to leave Beltram despite his plans of graduating the academy. As the students move on, Flora protests Stuart's decision and decides to go on her own to save Rio. At that moment, a giant minotaur attacks them, as they all struggle to fight it. Before the minotaur can kill Flora, Rio shows up and saves her by cutting the minotaur's hand. The minotaur and Rio exchange blows, but Rio overpowers it and cuts off his head. Following that, Rio decides to leave Beltram and says his goodbyes to Celia as he reveals his plans of going to Yagumo, his homeland, and promises to write her letters under the pen name of Haruto. Rio goes to the market town of Amend, where he hangs out, buys some food and later writes a letter to Celia, telling her how he is and where he is. After leaving town, Rio comes across an unconscious girl in the forest. Just as Rio checks on her, she attacks him with her knife and turns out to be a demi-girl and an assassin tasked with killing Rio. She aggressively attacks Rio, but Rio overpowers her and puts her to sleep. Noticing the submission collar, Rio figures she's not herself and is controlled by someone else. After Rio releases her of the collar, the girl wakes up. When Rio asks her who she is and who sent her, she reveals that her name is Latifa, and her master is Stuart, whom Rio happens to know from the academy. Rio decides to leave, but Latifa offers to take him to her village, People of the Spirits, to which Rio agrees. On the way there, Rio and Latifa camp to rest. Latifa reveals that she was in Japan and found herself in this world in another girl's body. After Latifa sleeps, Rio is surrounded by a group of other demi-girls. Thinking that Rio is holding Latifa captive, Yuzuma, the winged girl, attacks Rio and knocks him out. Later, Rio wakes up to find himself chained to a bed. Latifa hugs him and explains to the other girls what happened. Ursula, the elder, walks in and has the girls apologize to Rio for thinking so low of him. After Rio is released, he meets up with Ursula and the other elders, Dominic and Sildora, who allow him to stay with them. A second later, Dryas, the spirit of the world tree, appears, greets Rio and tells him about a sleeping spirit in the form of a human being sleeping inside him, which is something rare and powerful. Rio stays at the village and has a good time with Latifa and the girls. He hangs out with them, he trains with them and learns a great deal about magic. A year later, the Grand Spirit Festival takes place. Meanwhile, Rias takes a young kid to a cave where they steal a big egg, belonging to a wyvern. Rias then tells the kid they're going to steal more eggs from the village of the People of the Spirit. During the festival, Rio reveals to Latifa that he's leaving, upsetting her. Meanwhile, Rias arrives at the village and has the kid swallow a red pill so Rias can know where he is, just in case something happens. Rias goes to the cave to steal the eggs. After Dryas senses intruders breaching the barrier of the village, the elders send the girls to investigate. Encountering the kid, Yuzuma and the others tell him to turn himself in, but the kid mounts the eagle. Just as the kid tries to fly away, the wyvern looms over him, exactly what Rias has planned. Seeing that his plan to attack the People of the Spirit worked, Rias crushes the red pill in his hand, resulting in the death of the kid, thereby his fall from the dragon. The wyvern attacks the village. Before it can kill Latifa, Rio attacks the wyvern and kills it. The next day, Rio decides to leave the village. Prior to his departure, the elders gift him a leather jacket made out of the wyvern's skin, a sword, some food and a teleportation device that enables him to go anywhere. Through the teleportation device, Rio goes to Yagumo in the Karasuki Kingdom, where he meets Rory and Seo, who take him to the head of the village. When Rio tells Yuba about his parents' names, she is shocked and reveals to him that she's his father's mother. After Rio visits his parents' graves, Yuba allows him to stay at the village. Rio enjoys a happy quiet life with Seo and Ruri, who turns out to be his cousin. Rio also gets to know Seo's brother Shin and goes hunting with him. One day, a man named Gon stops by the village, flirts with Ruri and Seo, and fights Shin. Meanwhile, Yuba has a man named Hayate accompany Rio to the castle town where he'll learn more about his parents. When night falls, Gon attempts to take advantage of Seo and Ruri, but Rio shows up, throws Gon out of the room and beats him within an inch of his life before Hayate breaks up the fight and start healing the bruised up Gon. The next day, Rio goes to the castle town, where he hangs out with Shin and Seo. While shopping with Seo, Rio encounters some men trying to abduct a young girl named Kokumo. Rio fights off the men and saves Kokumo. Meanwhile, Hayate delivers Yuba's letter to a man named Gauki, who is surprised after reading it. Gauki pays Rio a visit and reveals to him that he knew his parents, as he also tells him that his father was a warrior renowned for his prowess and was promoted to become a royal guard of the king's daughter, who happens to be his mother. The two fell in love and got married afterwards, signifying that he is the grandson of the king of Yagumo. Gauki then tells Rio to meet up with his maternal grandparents, to which Rio agrees. The next day, Rio meets up with his grandparents and talks to them about his mother, how she was slain by a man named Lucius in front of his eyes, and that he vows to kill Lucius on sight. The king replies that Lucius is one strong individual, so Rio needs to be well prepared to fight him, which is why he needs to fight Gauki, whose fighting skills are paralleled by no other. Rio fights Gauki before the king and the queen. The two trade blows. Rio overwhelms Gauki with his fast attacks, but Gauki stands his ground. Gauki gathers magical energy around his sword and attacks Rio with the air slash. Rio blocks the attack and distracts Gauki with a counter-attack and ultimately defeats him. Prior to leaving Yagumo, Ruri confesses her love to Rio and requests to join him, as she's been secretly training to make sure she's not a burden on Rio, but Rio turns her down. Rio returns to the spirit village and spends the night there. The next day, Latifa and the girls walk into his room, only to find another girl sleeping with him. Rio calms them down and tells them that was the inner spirit sleeping within him, only now she's awakened and sleeping next to him. When the girl wakes up, Rio names her Aisha. Next, Rio fights with Aisha to test her skills and power. To his surprise, she blocks all of his attacks and is quite good at wielding magic. Later, Rio teaches her more about magic and the spirits. Rio then decides to leave and head to the Beltram kingdom. Prior to his departure, the elders of the village give him an earring he can use to dye his hair if he goes to Beltram. When Aisha and Rio arrive at Beltram, Rio decides to stop by and check on Celia but is surprised when he doesn't find her at the academy. Rio has Aisha enchant the guard into telling them about Celia, and it turns out she'll be married to Charles Arbor for political reasons. Meanwhile, Celia's father has a conversation with his soon-to-be son-in-law. Seemingly, Celia's father feigns approval, but deep down, he's not fond of the marriage, signifying that he's been forced into it. Later on, Rio visits Celia and confronts her about the marriage, but Celia pretends that everything is okay and kicks Rio out. The next day, the wedding starts and a parade is made for Celia and Charles. Rio gatecrashes the wedding, knocks out Charles, holds a knife to Celia's throat and tells her to act like a hostage. Rio carries Celia away, as Celia screams for Charles to help her. Rio hands Celia to Aisha to get Celia out, while Rio distracts the guards. While Rio fights the guards, the king's sword, Alfred, battles Rio. The two trade blows, as Alfred overwhelms Rio with his strength. Alfred then decides to end it and unleashes his ultimate attack on Rio. However, after the attack, there's no trace of Rio, signifying he's fled during the attack. Later, Rio gets out of Beltram and meets up with Celia and Aisha. Suddenly, 3 beams fall from the sky. 3 kids emerge and are kidnapped by bandits. Before the bandits lock the kids in their carriages to trade them as slaves, Rio arrives, kills the bandits and saves them. Much to Rio's shock, one of the kids turns out to be Miharu, his first childhood friend and love, whom he promised to meet again back when he was Haruto.